John Walker is the owner of a small convenience store in Willow Creek, a peaceful town nestled among lush green fields and a winding stream beneath drooping willow branches. Life here is slow and simple, a place where everyone knows each other and always greets one another warmly. To John, Willow Creek is not just where he lives, but the home of his most cherished memories, where he once had a perfect family. In this little haven, Emmy, John's only daughter, was the pride and brightest light of the family. At 18, Emmy embodied all that was good in life: intelligent, beautiful, well behaved, and full of determination. Her jet black hair shimmered like velvet, and her sparkling eyes were filled with joy and ambition. But what John and his wife loved most about Emmy was her compassionate heart. Not only was she an excellent student, but she was also actively involved in volunteer work, always ready to help those around her. The family's greatest joy came when Emmy received a full scholarship from New York University, a dream she had pursued for years. It was not just her dream, but also the hope and pride of the entire family. John could never forget the moment Emmy held the acceptance letter from the university, running to him with teary eyes, exclaiming, "Dad, I did it!" He embraced his daughter, laughing and crying at the same time, his heart overflowing with happiness. His wife stood beside him, unable to hold back tears of joy. The days leading up to Emmy's departure from Willow Creek were filled with happiness and advice. John meticulously prepared everything for his daughter's journey, from small items like notebooks to her favorite scarf. His wife constantly reminded Emmy, "Take care of your health, eat well, and always call home." Emmy cherished every moment with her parents. She often helped her father at the convenience store, talking about her plans in New York as she worked. "You'll be proud of me. I'll do my best not to let you down." Emmy's words were a heartfelt promise from her passionate soul. Willow Creek, with its drooping willows and gently flowing stream, seemed to preserve every beautiful memory of the Walker family. But those radiant days didn't last forever. That morning, the gentle sunlight bathed Willow Creek, filtering through the willow branches along the stream. The crisp autumn air added a fresh and vibrant energy to everything. In front of the Walker home, John and his wife stood with Emmy, her suitcase neatly placed by her side. Emmy, in a light blue dress, her eyes shining brightly and her lips curled into a radiant smile, adjusted the scarf her mother had just draped over her shoulders. "Mom, Dad, I'll call as soon as I get to the dorm, and I promise I won't forget to write," Emmy said, laughing, her eyes sparkling with excitement. John gently reached out to fix her hair, his voice soft. "Make sure to stay warm. It'll be colder in New York than it is here. And don't skip meals, my dear." His wife stood beside him, her eyes red but still managing a smile. "Study well, sweetheart. We're always so proud of you." As the car carrying Emmy began to roll away, she lowered the window, waving goodbye. "Mom, Dad, I love you so much." The sound of the car faded into the distance, leaving only her silhouette visible in the sunlight. John and his wife stood in front of their house, watching the car until it disappeared, their hearts brimming with pride and hope for their daughter's bright future. That afternoon, the skies over Willow Creek gradually turned gray. Heavy dark clouds obscured the sunlight, as if foretelling something ominous. John was busy taking inventory in his convenience store. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past 2 p.m. Emmy must be arriving soon, he thought, a faint smile appearing on his face. His wife, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen, had just reminded him, "Don't forget to tell her to call when she gets to the dorm." Suddenly, the phone rang, piercing through the quiet atmosphere. John quickly wiped his hands and picked up the receiver, his voice calm. "Hello, this is John Walker." But within seconds, the smile on his face vanished. His expression shifted from surprise to pale shock, his hands trembling, and the phone almost slipped from his grasp. On the other end was the serious voice of a patrol officer. "Mr. Walker, I'm deeply sorry to inform you. Your daughter, Emmy Walker, was in a severe accident on Highway 89. We're investigating the scene, but there were no survivors." John froze as if paralyzed. His body felt devoid of strength. The phone dropped to the floor, making a chilling clatter. His wife heard the noise and rushed over, her face filled with worry. "John? What's wrong? What happened to Emmy?" But John couldn't respond. His lips quivered, unable to form words. Finally, a single sentence escaped. "Emmy, she's been in a terrible accident." His wife's scream tore through the calm of their small home. She collapsed to the floor, clutching John tightly, tears streaming uncontrollably. "No, this can't be. Not our Emmy. It can't be true." Her words repeated through her sobs of despair. John held her, but he too couldn't stop the tears. His heart felt like it was being torn apart, a paralyzing pain consuming his entire being. Outside, rain began to pour. Heavy raindrops pelted against the windows, each thud resonating with the anguish inside them. When John gathered the strength to ask for more details, the officer explained. The vehicle carrying Emmy lost control when the rain began, colliding with a large truck. The accident was devastating. John tried to picture the scene: a shattered car, glass fragments scattered everywhere, and his daughter, Emmy. John and his wife rushed to the hospital in the pouring rain. They ran frantically down the long hallway, the cold fluorescent lights above making the atmosphere even more suffocating. They were led to an emergency room. John's heart pounded, as if it might burst from his chest. When the door swung open, the sight before them was like a nightmare. Emmy lay motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment and machines. Her face was covered in scratches and bruises, and her once bright eyes were now tightly shut. One of her arms was immobilized in a white cast, and her chest rose and fell weakly in sync with the ventilator. "Emmy, our daughter." John collapsed to his knees, unable to stand any longer. His wife broke into sobs, rushing to grab Emmy's cold hand. "Emmy, open your eyes, sweetheart. It's Mom. You can't leave us like this." Her words echoed through the room, but Emmy couldn't respond. The doctor entered, his face grave. "We've done everything we could, but her injuries are too severe. She's in a deep coma. You should prepare yourselves." Those words crushed the couple. John's wife wept even harder, while he remained silent, his red, tear-filled eyes fixed on his daughter, his heart twisting in pain. Not long after, Emmy could no longer fight. In her final moments, John and his wife sat beside her bed, holding her hands tightly, as if unwilling to let go. John choked on his tears as he whispered, "Emmy, you're the greatest pride of our lives. If you have to leave, know that you'll always be the light of this family." Through her tears, his wife murmured, "I love you, Emmy. I love you so much." A long, steady beep echoed from the heart monitor. Time seemed to stop, and the room fell silent except for the sound of rain falling outside the window. Emmy's body grew cold, and John knew he had just lost a part of himself. Time passed, but the pain of losing their daughter remained an indelible part of the Walkers' lives. 3 years had gone by since Emmy left this world, yet the small house in Willow Creek remained untouched, as though she were still there. Emmy's room, adorned with cherished photographs, half-read books on her desk, and her favorite dress draped over the chair, was preserved exactly as it had been, as if time had frozen in her final moment. For John, keeping these reminders of Emmy was his way of holding onto her presence, a way to feel as if she were still somewhere in the house. But for Elizabeth, his wife, it was different. The mementos of Emmy, which once brought her joy and pride, had now become an unbearable weight. Every time she walked past Emmy's room, it felt like her heart was being torn apart anew. She tried to maintain a composed exterior, tried to go on with life, but the pain gnawed away at her soul bit by bit. One cold winter morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the bare branches outside, John awoke in the stillness of their home. The whistling wind through the window cracks added to the chill in the air. As usual, he went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, but his attention was drawn to a neatly folded piece of paper on the table. It was Elizabeth's handwriting, soft and familiar, etched into his memory over the years. John's heart tightened. A sense of unease crept in as he picked up the letter, his hands trembling. He opened it, and the words within felt like daggers cutting into his heart. Asterisk, my dearest John, I've tried, truly tried, to stay. But with each passing day, I feel more and more lost. Everything here reminds me of Emmy. The faint scent lingering in her room, the echo of her laughter that I keep hearing in my mind. I can't bear waking up every day, facing this house and the memories that are slowly destroying me from the inside. I don't blame you for holding on to everything that belonged to Emmy, but I'm not as strong as you are. I need to leave to find a place where the pain isn't so overwhelming. John, I hope you can find peace too, in your own way. You've been a wonderful father and the husband I've loved most in this life. I don't want to leave you, but I can't stay here anymore. Please forgive me and live well, John. Find meaning in life again, if not for me, then for Emmy. Forever yours, Elizabeth. Asterisk as John read the letter. It felt as though his world was crumbling once more. He collapsed into the chair, his trembling hands clutching the letter tightly, tears streaming silently down his face. He didn't blame Elizabeth. He understood her pain, understood that her departure wasn't because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't endure it any longer. After Elizabeth left, the house, already quiet, became eerily empty. The familiar sounds, the laughter of Emmy, the sound of Elizabeth's footsteps in the kitchen, now existed only in his memories. John wandered through the house, looking at objects that had once been part of their happy family, feeling as though everything was sinking into an endless void. The dining room, once the heart of family meals, was now silent. Emmy's chair remained in its place, but no one dared to sit in it. John often stood at a distance, gazing at the chair, recalling the times when Emmy would laugh and share stories about school. Now, all that remained was a cold, hollow space. Unable to continue living in a home filled with painful memories, John threw himself into work at his convenience store. From morning till night, he immersed himself in routine tasks, hoping to distract himself. He meticulously arranged the shelves, cleaned the counters, and checked every item in the store. The work didn't bring him joy, but at least it filled the empty hours. When the store closed at night, John often sat alone at the register, staring out the window. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet at night, the dim streetlights casting long shadows beneath the drooping willows. In these moments, memories of Emmy resurfaced vividly. He often watched young women walking past the store and wondered, if Emmy were still alive, what would she be like now? How would she look at 21? These thoughts tore at his heart, leaving him with an ache that never seemed to fade. One afternoon, like any other day, John's convenience store remained quiet. The soft rays of the setting sun streamed through the glass windows, casting a golden glow on the neatly arranged shelves. John stood behind the cash register, absorbed in checking the store's ledgers. Suddenly, the gentle chime of the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of a customer. Looking up, John saw a petite black girl, about 18 years old, entering the store. Her slender frame and worn-out appearance immediately caught his attention. Her deep, sorrowful eyes carried an indescribable weight, as though the burdens of the world rested on her frail shoulders. She wore an old, slightly oversized coat and faded jeans. Without saying a word, the girl quickly walked to the instant noodle aisle, picked up a pack, and headed toward the counter. John observed her with curiosity, sensing something unusual. "Hello there," he greeted warmly, trying to start a conversation. But the girl merely nodded slightly, placed the noodles on the counter, and avoided his gaze. After paying, she left the store, leaving behind a strange silence. The next day, at precisely 5 p.m., the girl returned. She looked just as quiet and reserved as before, picking out the same instant noodles. John began to notice a pattern. Every day, she would arrive at the same time, purchase noodles, and leave just as quickly. Then, at exactly 11 p.m., she would return again to buy a can of soda. This peculiar routine continued for days, enough to make John realize she was unlike his regular customers. He began paying closer attention to her behavior. The girl always maintained her distance, never engaging in long conversations, and her sorrowful eyes always avoided direct contact. She moved quickly, never stopping at any other aisles, her demeanor suggesting a sense of urgency, as though she were running away from something. Jean found himself drawn to observing her. He couldn't explain why she affected him so deeply. Perhaps it was her melancholic eyes, her frail figure, or the quiet pain she seemed to carry with her. She reminded John of Emmy, not in appearance, but in her age and the delicate, vulnerable aura she exuded. Questions began to form in his mind. Where does she live? Why does she eat instant noodles every day? Is she all right? Although he didn't pry further, John silently kept a close eye on her every move whenever she came to the store. He tried offering her a warm smile as he rang up her items, but she only responded with a curt nod. She was like a lonely puzzle piece in the picture of John's life, and he couldn't figure out how to connect with her. One evening, when the girl returned at 11 p.m., John noticed something different. Her steps were slower than usual, her face pale, and her eyes ringed with fatigue. As she placed the soda can on the counter, her hands trembled so much that the can slipped and fell onto the counter. John frowned in concern, asking, "Are you all right?" The girl looked up, her weary eyes meeting John's concerned gaze. A moment of silence passed before she gave a faint nod. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was so soft it was almost inaudible, and the forced smile on her face only deepened John's unease. The following day, at 5 p.m., she returned again. This time, however, she looked even more worn out. Her complexion was pale, and her steps were heavy. She grabbed her usual pack of noodles and walked to the counter. Unable to hold back his concern, John asked gently, "Do you need any help?" She shook her head without saying a word, still keeping her distance. But as John watched her leave the store, he couldn't take his eyes off her frail silhouette. A growing sense of unease enveloped him, and he couldn't stop himself from wondering, what is this girl going through? That afternoon, the skies over Willow Creek were heavy and gray, blanketed with thick clouds. Dim lights seeped through the glass windows, casting an eerie chill over the shelves in the convenience store. John stood behind the cash register, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 5 p.m., the time the mysterious girl usually appeared. The soft chime of the doorbell announced the arrival of a customer. As expected, it was her, but today she looked drastically different. Her face was pale and gaunt, her sunken eyes devoid of energy. Her slow, labored steps suggested that every movement was a struggle. She made her way to the instant noodle aisle as she always did, grabbed a pack, and headed straight to the counter. When she placed the noodles on the counter, her hands trembled visibly, and John could see exhaustion etched into her every movement. Are you all right? John asked, his voice filled with concern. The girl looked up, her sorrowful eyes briefly meeting his before darting away. I'm fine, she replied, her voice so faint and weak it was barely audible. John watched as she left the register and walked over to a small plastic table in the corner of the store. He observed her from a distance, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. She sat down, opened the lid of the noodle cup, and poured in hot water. Steam rose gently, but she remained motionless, staring blankly at the cup as though lost in thought. After a while, she picked up the chopsticks and prepared to take her first bite. But just as she was about to eat, her body froze. Her eyes widened for a moment before slowly closing. Without warning, she collapsed onto the floor, the chopsticks slipping from her hand, and the cup of noodles toppled over, spilling its contents. What's going on? Hey, are you okay? John shouted as he rushed out from behind the counter. He knelt beside her, gently shaking her frail shoulders, but she didn't respond. Her breathing was faint, and her body was alarmingly cold. Wake up! Stay with me. John pleaded desperately, but she remained unresponsive. Panicking, he scooped her up in his arms, her light and fragile frame almost weightless. Without a moment's hesitation, he ran to his car, ignoring the light rain that had started to fall. Carefully placing her in the passenger seat, he quickly climbed into the driver's side and sped toward the hospital, his mind racing with worry. As the girl was taken into the emergency room, John remained in the hospital's waiting area. The long, brightly lit hallway, the sterile smell of disinfectant, and the cold atmosphere only amplified his anxiety. He couldn't stop worrying, his hands tightly clasped together, his eyes fixed on the closed doors of the emergency room. Inside him, an inexplicable connection to the girl, whose name he still didn't know, continued to grow. After a while, a doctor emerged, his face serious but not overly grim. The girl is severely exhausted and showing signs of acute gastritis caused by irregular eating habits. We've administered 4 fluids, and she's recovering now. She'll need to be monitored for a few hours, but she's no longer in danger. Hearing this, John let out a sigh of relief. He nodded gratefully to the doctor, who then allowed him to visit her in the hospital room. Inside the room, the girl lay quietly on the white hospital bed, her face still pale, but no longer marked by the pain she'd shown earlier. Her eyes were slightly open, staring weakly at the ceiling, but she seemed more alert. When John entered, she stirred slightly, trying to sit up, but her body was still too weak. Just rest, no need to push yourself, John said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. She glanced at him, her tired eyes tinged with a hint of gratitude. Thank you. I'm okay now. John gave her a soft smile, feeling a wave of relief wash over him as he heard her speak. I'm the one who brought you here. I just wanted to make sure you'd be all right. What's your name? The girl blinked, hesitating for a moment before replying. My name is Suli. Suli, John repeated, letting the name sink in. It felt both unfamiliar and strangely meaningful. He smiled gently. That's a beautiful name, Suli, but you've pushed yourself too hard. Letting yourself get this exhausted isn't good at all. Suli gave a faint nod, but said nothing more. One late afternoon, a few days after being admitted to the hospital, Suli was gradually recovering. Her face was still pale, but her eyes now carried a faint brightness. John visited her every day, bringing small snacks in hopes of helping her recover more quickly. Sitting down by her hospital bed, he placed a small bag of fruit on the table and looked at Suli, speaking gently. Are you feeling any better? Suli nodded slightly, offering a weak smile. I'm better now. Thank you so much for helping me. John shook his head, his gaze warm and kind. It's nothing really, but I still don't understand how you let yourself get this exhausted. If you're willing, could you tell me what happened?" Suli hesitated for a moment, her eyes lowering to her hands. But John's sincere expression made her feel safe. After taking a deep breath, she began to share. "I'm an orphan. I don't know who my biological parents are. Since I was little, I grew up in a small orphanage on the outskirts of town. Those years, they weren't easy, but I learned how to take care of myself early on. I've always believed that if I worked hard enough, someday I could change my life." John listened in silence, his eyes growing somber as each of her words seemed to pierce his heart. Suli continued, her voice soft yet filled with determination. "Through hard work, I earned a full scholarship to college. I was so happy. It was the opportunity I'd always dreamed of, to escape poverty and become someone who could help other orphans like I once was." She paused briefly, her gaze dropping. "But I never imagined how hard life in the big city would be. The scholarship only covered tuition, and the cost of living was just too high. I had to juggle multiple jobs, working as a barista, cleaning houses, tutoring just to make ends meet. I barely had time to rest, and I often forgot to eat properly, until I collapsed from exhaustion like this." Hearing this, John felt as though his heart was being squeezed. Memories of Emmy surfaced in his mind. Two girls the same age, both carrying big dreams. But Emmy, surrounded by love and support, had steadily pursued her goals. Suli, on the other hand, had borne the weight of everything alone, battling a harsh reality that had brought her to this breaking point. John looked at Suli, his heart filled with deep sorrow. He saw in her not only strength, but also an overwhelming loneliness. A loneliness he understood all too well, having experienced it himself since losing Emmy and watching his wife leave. "You've been through so much," John said softly, his voice catching in his throat. "I can't imagine how someone as young as you has managed to endure all of that." Suli gave a faint smile. "I didn't have a choice. If I didn't keep going, no one else would do it for me." Her words left John speechless. He gazed at the girl in front of him, a petite figure carrying immense resilience, refusing to give in to life's challenges. In Suli, he saw a reflection of what Emmy might have been if she had lived and pursued her dreams in the big city. That night, as John returned home, he couldn't stop thinking about Suli's story. Her every word and her sorrowful eyes lingered in his mind. She wasn't just a stranger who had fainted in his store. She was a wounded piece of life's puzzle, a person who had fought tirelessly to rise above her circumstances, but had been beaten down by life's hardships. John realized that Suli didn't just need help to overcome her immediate struggles. She needed a companion, a support system, a family, something she had never truly had. And perhaps, in some way, he needed her too, to fill the void that Emmy had left in his heart. During her days in the hospital, Suli gradually began to feel a sense of comfort whenever John was around. He didn't speak much. He simply showed up with some fruit, a few snacks, or an old book and quietly sat by her side. Occasionally, he shared small stories about his convenience store, amusing customers, or the serene moments in the quiet town of Willow Creek. At first, Suli hadn't thought she would open up to this man, but John's patience and sincerity slowly made her feel at ease. Without asking too many questions or pressuring her to talk, John created an environment where Suli naturally began to share her story. She talked about her lonely childhood in the orphanage, the long, arduous days without anyone to rely on. She had grown accustomed to silence, to bearing everything on her own, never imagining that she could lean on anyone. John listened intently, never interrupting, occasionally nodding or responding with a short comment. But his eyes said it all. He was truly listening, genuinely understanding what Suli had endured. One day, When Suli mentioned the lonely nights in her dorm room, the solitude in the small space with no one to talk to, John suddenly thought of Emmy. He sat up straight, his gaze drifting into the distance, as though he were looking beyond the walls of the hospital room. He began to tell Suli about Emmy, his only daughter who had once been the light of his life. Emmy, too, had been a young girl full of ambition, eager to explore a bigger world. But a single accident had taken everything away. As John spoke, his voice didn't tremble, but every word carried a profound pain that had etched itself into his very being. Suli sat silently, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. She could feel the immense loss John was hiding behind his composed demeanor. You know, Miami was a lot like you, John said, his voice softening, almost as though he were speaking to himself. She always worked so hard to chase her dreams, but life didn't let her get as far as you have. Suli didn't know how to respond. She couldn't compare her pain to John's, but she deeply understood the feeling of loss he was experiencing because she had never had a family to lose. When she hesitantly shared about watching other children at the orphanage being adopted, the moments of hope followed by heartbreak when no one chose her, John sat still. Her longing for a family and the necessity of accepting loneliness struck a chord with him. The two sat there, saying nothing, yet the air between them didn't feel empty. John and Suli, one who had lost a family, the other who had never had one, found solace in their shared understanding of life's greatest voids. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger. Suli realized that John wasn't just listening to her story. He truly understood every ounce of pain she had endured. He didn't offer hollow reassurances. Instead, he showed her that pain didn't define her as weak, but as someone strong for surviving it. For John, Suli reminded him of Emmy, not in appearance or personality, but in her resilience and the way she faced life head-on despite the hardships. He didn't just want to help her out of a sense of duty. She had become a part of his journey to rediscover meaning in his own life. Every conversation between them became a small bridge across the vast chasm of loneliness. Two wounded souls found comfort in each other, not because they could replace what they had lost, but because they realized they were no longer alone on this journey. John never imagined that after everything he had lost, a young girl like Suli could bring him hope, a reason to keep living and to love again. And for Suli, for the first time in her life, she felt the warmth of a father's love, something she had never known before. One late autumn afternoon, the soft sunlight streamed through the windows of John's small convenience store. He stood behind the cash register, checking the newly stocked items. The glass door gently opened, and the familiar chime of the bell announced the arrival of a customer, just as it always did. John looked up, but this time, it wasn't just Suli who walked in. Beside her was a young man, tall, with a bright face and a gentle smile. John was momentarily surprised. It was the first time he had seen Suli accompanied by someone else. Suli approached the counter, a rare smile lighting up her usually serious face. She stopped in front of the register and looked at John with a sparkle in her eyes, a joy that was almost indescribable. "Uncle John, this is my boyfriend," she said, her voice tinged with a shy but clear tone. John smiled, hiding his surprise, but deep down, he felt a quiet happiness. He glanced at the young man, nodded, and joked, "Hello there. I hope you know that Suli is a very special girl." But what surprised John even more was what happened next. Suli turned to the young man and said softly, "This is my dad." John froze. The word dad struck him like a bolt of lightning in the stillness of the store. For a moment, his heart seemed to stop. He looked at Suli, his eyes filled with both confusion and overwhelming emotion. Suli turned back to John, her eyes brimming with emotion, as though everything she had ever wanted to say was pouring out in this single moment. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling but filled with sincerity. "I've never had the chance to call anyone that. I grew up not knowing what it feels like. But since meeting you, I've learned what it means to be loved and cared for." John stood still, unable to speak. "You've given me more than just help. You've given me the feeling of having a family, something I thought I would never have. Today, I want to tell you that I want to be your daughter. I want to share with you my first love, the little joys in my life. And someday, I want you to walk me down the aisle." Tears streamed down John's face. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Every word Sully spoke seemed to heal the wounds he had carried in his heart for so many years. John stepped out from behind the counter and stood in front of Sully. Without saying a word, he opened his arms and embraced her. The hug wasn't just an acceptance, it was a promise. A promise to always be there for her, to protect her, and to love her as a real father would. Sully wrapped her arms around John, her voice breaking through her tears. "Thank you, Dad." In that moment, both of them felt a sense of healing. John had rediscovered what it meant to be a father, and Sully had finally found the family she had always longed for. John stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Sully's face. Each word she spoke seemed to make time stop. In that moment, memories of Emmy surged through him like a relentless wave. He saw his daughter's radiant eyes when she received her college scholarship, her bright smile as she waved goodbye the day she left home, and the gentle expression on her face during their last moments together in the hospital. The pain of loss and the wounds he thought could never heal resurfaced, more vivid than ever. But this time, instead of pulling him into a deep abyss of sorrow, those memories carried with them something new, a flicker of light in his heart. John looked at Sully, the young woman with bright yet pain-laden eyes who had entered his life like a miracle. She wasn't Emmy, nor could she ever replace her, but she brought back something John thought he had lost forever. The feeling of being loved, the sense of being needed, and the belief that his life still had meaning. He realized that Sully had long ceased to be just a girl he had happened to help. She was the one who had helped him rediscover the purpose of life. Every day, he spent caring for her, listening to her, and watching her slowly open her heart had given him a new reason to live, a hope he had abandoned the day Emmy passed away. In Sully's eyes, John saw more than gratitude. He saw trust and sincere love, the kind of love he had yearned for but never dared to believe he could find again. Taking a deep breath, John tried to hold back the tears welling up inside him. But in the end, he couldn't. The tears fell freely, not tears of sorrow, but of healing, of hope, and of joy he never thought he would feel again. John stepped closer, placing his hand gently on Sully's shoulder. His voice, choked with emotion but resolute, said, "Thank you, Sully. You've given me, no, you've given your dad, something I thought I could never find again. I promise you, I will always be here for you, by your side, for every important moment of your life." Sully smiled through her tears, her slight, not a silent affirmation that they had both found the family they had been missing for so long. In that moment, John felt the emptiness in his heart dissolve. A part of him, which he thought had been lost forever with Emmy, was now filled by Sully's presence, a daughter not by blood, but someone who had become an irreplaceable part of his life. John couldn't hold back his emotions. He stepped forward, wrapped Sully in a tight embrace, as if afraid that if he didn't, she might vanish from his life. In that hug, all the pain, the loss, and the loneliness of the past years seemed to dissolve. In their place, an overwhelming wave of love surged through his heart. "All right," his voice trembled. yet carried unwavering certainty. I will walk you down the aisle. I will protect you and care for you for the rest of my life, my daughter. Suli clung to him tightly, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't find the words to express herself, only the deep gratitude and love she felt for John's sincere devotion. Time passed, and the day of Suli's wedding finally arrived. It was a crisp spring morning, with sunlight gently filtering through the green leaves outside the small church. Willow Creek seemed to glow, not just from the weather, but from the joyful atmosphere radiating from the wedding. John, dressed sharply in a suit, stood outside the church doors, gazing at Suli in her pristine white wedding gown. She looked radiant and beautiful, her smile shining like a light that illuminated the darkest corners of his heart. In that moment, John realized his life had once again become complete. As the music began to play, John extended his hand, and Suli placed hers in his. Together, they walked down the aisle, step by step, slow but steady. All eyes were on them, but John's focus remained solely on his daughter, the one he had chosen to love as his own flesh and blood. A broad smile spread across John's face, the first genuine smile in years, after so much pain and loss. It was a smile not just of joy, but of healing and hope. When they reached the center of the aisle, John stopped and turned to Suli. "I'm so proud of you, Suli. You are the greatest gift I've ever received." Suli looked at him, her tear-filled eyes radiating happiness. "And you are the best father I could have ever dreamed of." John placed Suli's hand in her groom's, but he knew that the bond between him and Suli would never be broken. They didn't need shared blood to be a family. Love, understanding, and kindness had bound them together in a way that was stronger than anything else in the world. That day, the church was filled with laughter, joy, and tears of happiness. And John, for the first time in years, felt his heart truly at peace. The story of John and Suli carries profound lessons about love, empathy, and finding hope in the darkest moments of life. Family is not defined by blood, but by love and choice. John and Suli demonstrate that family doesn't need to be tied by biological connections. Love, care, and understanding are the true foundations of a real family. Pain can give rise to strength and connection. John's grief over losing Emmy and Suli's lack of a family could have broken them, yet it became the bond that united them. Their shared understanding of loss allowed them to find new meaning in life. Never underestimate the power of kindness. John's simple act of helping Suli when she fainted changed her entire life. Kindness might not bring immediate change, but sometimes it is the lifeline someone needs to keep going. Life always allows room for healing and new beginnings. Despite losing his family and feeling empty, John found joy and purpose again through Suli. This reminds us that as long as we remain open, there's always an opportunity to start anew. Sharing pain is the first step toward healing. Both John and Suli once bore their pain in solitude. When they shared their stories, their pain wasn't just understood, it became the bridge that brought them comfort and strength. Opening your heart can change your life. Suli, once closed off due to hardship and a lack of love, found herself opening up thanks to John's sincerity. This allowed her to experience real love and belonging for the first time. Everyone needs emotional support. No matter how strong we are, we cannot face all challenges alone. Suli needed John to feel love, and John needed Suli to fill the void of loss in his heart. Small moments can change lives. The simple conversations and shared stories between John and Suli seemed insignificant at first, but they profoundly transformed both their lives, leading them from loneliness to happiness. Love has no limits of time or circumstance. John thought he could never love anyone again after his loss, but Sully proved that the human heart always has room for goodness if given the chance. Patience is the foundation of relationships. Had John not shown patience in caring for and listening to Sully, she might never have opened up. Patience builds trust, especially with those who have endured great pain. Happiness comes from making others happy. John rediscovered joy and peace through Sully's happiness. Her fulfillment became his own, showing that happiness often lies in giving rather than receiving. Live to create value for others. John, once drowning in pain, found purpose again by choosing to care for and love Sully. Living for others can bring immense meaning to our own lives. Everyone deserves love and appreciation. Sully once saw herself as a burden, but John helped her recognize her worth and that she deserved love just as much as anyone else. Love can redefine the future. By accepting each other as family, John and Sully transformed their lives. Love erased their past pain and opened a brighter, hopeful new chapter. We can all be someone's miracle. John entered Sully's life as a stranger, but became her dad. Sometimes a small act of care and genuine attention can make us a miracle in someone else's life. The story reminds us that no matter how harsh and painful life may be, love and kindness can create miracles, heal broken hearts, and bring hope.